Yeah, a lot of people want to watch it.
Okay, the recording starting. Your makeup on. Ladies and gentlemen, we reached 61 attendees.
And Jean-Louis, that poll, did you want me to mention that poll in the introduction? Okay.
I can launch.
And you don't need to launch it yet. When I mention it, then we can put it out there.
Yeah, let me know when.
Mm-hmm. And the question really is, how many of you know what's the question that you posted?
How many folks here have some idea what the Defund the Police movement is about?
Okay. My man, Jason.
Hey, Jason, homework in the house. What up, fam? Grace, I see Grace. Oh, Grace and Jesse are here. Hey, y'all.
I think you guys start whenever. It's gone up to 90 now.
We'll wait for a clean 100 and then we'll get started. There we go. Well, hello everybody, and welcome to the first of a series of political education classes that Pillars of the Community is going to be hosting. My name is Khalid Alexander. I'm the founder and president of Pillars of the Community. And you know, we're kind of excited. This is our first Zoom political education class. And what a time to have an opportunity to have important discussions. You know, the current uprising and the current unrest that we see throughout throughout the United States, and frankly, the protests of support that we see happening in other countries around the world, is, you know, one of those moments where we're clear that we are actually living through history. And that the question that I have as we're watching this, is it going to be a historical moment that we look back in the past and feel that we weren't able to capitalize off the energy and off of the momentum? Or is it going to be something that's led to real sustainable change and beginning to create a country that lives up to the ideals that were never meant for Black and brown people? But the moment we decide to start asking for those and decide to start demanding those rights, I think we'll begin to see real change. And so I'm cautiously optimistic about what the future is going to hold. So there's a number of narratives that are out there. One of the narratives is all of a sudden all of these Black and brown people and white allies are all upset because of the brutal murder and the suffocation and the torturous death of George Floyd. And people are already upset about the murder of Breonna Taylor. But I think really what's happening and why this conversation is important is because it's actually a reaction to years and years and years and years and a constant struggle to address the ways that police treat our community members on a daily basis. One of the most profound things for me watching these demonstrations has been the shock and the reaction that people have when they say, I can't believe that the police are attacking peaceful protesters. And I can't believe the disrespect and the way that they're treating them and bullying protesters and doing all of these things. The irony, of course, is this is exactly the way that they interact with young Black and brown boys and girls in our community every day. Being thrown up against walls, being beaten, having rights denied, being spoken to disrespectfully. Those are norms in what we've been doing for a very long time. And I think what these demonstrations have done is that they've outed the police departments and their actions and their real attitude towards the people that they're supposed to be here and protect. So we reached out to a few of people who are close allies to Pillars and close friends of mine and said, hey, you know what, we'd like to have a conversation. So as all of our political classes are at Pillars of the Community, we don't have a specific ideology that we're trying to push other than shit is complex. And I think there's a lot of complex issues that we're dealing with when it comes to police, when it comes to the conversation around defunding the police and what that actually means. So this is meant to be a conversation, and we have some amazing panelists that are going to be a part of that conversation. And so I look forward to being able to host that. Before we get started, we have an amazing tech savvy person that's helping facilitate this class, which is Jean-Louis, who's also an activist, really a moral compass and a voice for people who are oppressed in every kind of facet of life, both locally and statewide and nationally. And so we're really lucky to have him helping us through organizing this particular session. So thank you, Jean-Louis. Part of that is he created a poll to get us started with kind of answering this question. How many of you know what defunding the police actually means? Because frankly, and he's going to be posting that now in the chat so that people can actually fill that out. I see a couple of you showing off, trying to raise your hands and be like, I know, but we have a fancy poll that's out there. So please fill that out to kind of give us an idea. I will say that, you know, within the last 2 weeks, I've had to really look at that question of defunding the police. And as I researched it and learned more about it, I found that, you know, that we have kind of been advocating for defunding the police ever since we've done anything, but it hasn't been a part of the culture. So the shock value that word may have is actually, I think, a reflection of a lot of work that's going on. And so we have 78%, 75% feel strongly that they understand what that means, and 35% aren't quite sure, which frankly, I'm still believe that I'm in that camp. And 8% or 6% who are being honest and are like, no, I don't have the slightest idea of what defunding the police means, which is exactly why we need to have these conversations. And you know, as most things, I think a lot of people here are already well-read and aware of the issue, and that's why they're turning in. But hopefully we can increase the amount of people who aren't sure and go out from here and continue those conversations with our friends, with our neighbors, with our coworkers, and everybody else, because really we need to make sure that this momentum continues. So thank you, Jean-Louis, for posting that. Let me go ahead and open up the question, and any of the panelists feel free to answer in whatever order you all choose. So, I mean, let's start at the basics. Let's start at the basics of introducing yourselves, your background, the organization you're with, and what brings you to this discussion.
Oh, I'm unmuted, so I guess I'll go first. My name is Kim Moore, and I have been doing community organizing since 2005 in San Diego. And I've come quite a long ways from my early days as an organizer. I make no issues stating, you know, I was previously a reformist. It's still embarrassing to say that, but it's true. That's a part of my organizing history. Thankfully, I have grown out of that and moved to abolitionist practices. And I've been calling for defunding the police since 2013, I think, was when I first started understanding that police were serious issues and we could not reform them. I get down with Pillars. Pillars is that's my political home. That's the home team. That's Squad. That's who I organize with on a grassroots level. And I just love all the work that we do and the things that we've created. And I'm here, obviously, because this is an issue that I'm wholeheartedly invested in. Last year, I started calling out to other organizers in San Diego to pull folks together so that we could actually create alternatives to police here in San Diego. So it's not something that's new to me. It's something that I have been invested in for quite some time and want to continue this work. I lean heavily on radical Black feminists of our time and past, and the Black liberation movement, who have also been pushing for abolition and defunding police for many, many years. It's not a new concept, but something that work that we're continuing to pick up and do. So that's a little bit of my background. My gender pronouns are she, her, and hers. And we need to make sure that we're normalizing gender pronouns in our work as well. And I'm happy to be here.
Thank you, Kim. All right, I'm just going to call on people because I know that I've been one of those people who sits there in humility and waits to be last. So let's go ahead and move on to the one and only true pillar of the community, Leila Aziz.
I just knew he was going to let me go last. In my humbleness, my name is Leila Aziz. I began community outreach work probably around the age 25 with a Youth at Work program where I knocked on doors all over Southeast, pretty much every single door, and really got to learn my community, got to learn how to activate and organize within my community. That later led to more social service work though. So I went to case management, then program management, then director of operations, then a national director for youth offender programs, that's what they call them, and prison reentry programs. So I helped usher in some of those programs that I can stand before you right now and let you know they don't work. The successes we had in those programs were based on us not adhering to what they claimed was evidence-based research, which really wasn't, and really look at the more community aspect of building power and building self-determination within our community. In 2017, I left my job. Before then, I had become pretty much, I knew I was on a road that was not going to end the way that I wanted it to end, and my legacy could not be based on that. And that's when 33 Black men were arrested, and numerous of those youth were in my program. And when I found out that they had Facebook pictures, and that's why they were arrested, I knew reform didn't work, as Kim said. Things changed quickly. And I met Khaled, I joined the board, and then I later left, and I'm doing some of the most inspirational work that I've ever done.
Thank you, Leila. Let's go with Lily Serrano, please. Our comrades and friends from up north, the place that much of San Diego has forgotten.
Yes, thank you, Khalid. My name is Lilian Serrano. I have been in this fight for human rights for many years. I started back in high school, totally aging myself, but about 15 years ago. Most of my work and my time over the years has really emphasized or focused on advocacy around immigrant rights. But I just want to kind of make it clear that my long goal or long-term goal has always been human rights, right? Because in my community, you know, specifically Latinos, Mexicans living in the US have been now for generations suffering of a lot of human rights abuses in the hands of police, abuses in the hands of immigration enforcement, abuses in the hands of our own educational system that neglects us as a community. So currently my work is, like Khalid mentioned, focused in North San Diego County. So I live in the city of Escondido. I have been there for, it's close to 10 years now. The whole time, really just kind of putting up a fight against the collaboration between our local police department and immigration enforcement, but also taking that a little farther into how do we decriminalize our community. I'm currently also working with Universidad Popular, which expands our work throughout the region. So yeah, happy to be here.
Thank you, Lily. DJ Cutting Candy.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me here. My name is Candy, pronouns she, her, hers. I'm part of Asian Solidarity Collective. Our work is primarily to address anti-Blackness and anti-Black racism within our own communities and across communities of color, and work on solidarity, racial solidarity with an intersectional framework. Our work is
Their work is so powerful, it freezes the system.
It don't want me to speak. Goodness. Apologies. I don't know where y'all heard me from, but our work as Asian Solidarity is to address anti-Blackness and anti-Black racism, and to work in solidarity with Black, Indigenous, people of color across communities of color and cross-racial solidarity, as well as with an intersectional framework. So for me, I'm here specifically to highlight the importances of my own positionality as an Asian American, as a Filipinx, what it means for me to support and to be in solidarity in Black liberation movement, as well as what is abolition to me. I've been an abolitionist for as long as I can remember. Anything that I say is nothing new, and we all know this. The work that I've been rooted in is off of learning from folks that I grew up with, and learned my own organizing work from stemming from home in New York City to people like Rosa Clemente, and learning and watching the work of Malcolm X grassroots movement, to folks here in San Diego, learning off the work of Yuri Kuchiyama and Grace Lee Boggs. So that's where I'm rooted from. And for me, I love to dream abolition into fruition. That is why I'm here. And I show up in solidarity with folks here, with pillars of the community, those who are on the ground, local grassroots organizers who do this work, supporting that work. So I'm appreciative of sharing space with all of you.
Thank you. And last but not least, Flower.
Hello, everyone. My name is Flower Alvarez Lopez. I'm a Chicana. I'm also a North County, San Diego native, Upper County in the house. I'm part of a team called Universidad Popular and a program called Homie Up. I'm a Chicana educator with the program, and the program works with community members through a popular education model. We use popular education as a tool to reach community. I'm also a formerly incarcerated person. I know firsthand what it is, what policing is. I know firsthand what it's capable of and the effects it has on our families and our community. A lot of my work has to do with prison abolition, and I work around various different issues around education and health. I'm a researcher at the National Latino Research Center as well at Cal State San Marcos, and I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Flower. Yeah, and I can't express the amount of awe that I have and gratitude that I have for being connected to such an amazing kind of panelists and all of the work that you're doing. You know, we've had the opportunity to work closely with Homie Up and Universidad Popular up north. And, you know, it's always an empowering and inspirational experience to go up there and see the amazing work that you all are doing, really on a grassroots level that you don't often see with an amount of people that you don't always see. So please, people, look up Universidad Popular and Homie Up and all of the work that they're doing up there. Candy, you know, your presence speaks for itself and the Asian Solidarity Collective and the amount of work that you all have been doing over the last year or so, again, makes me feel bad that we're not doing more, but we always appreciate your solidarity. And then, you know, Leila and Kim, you all are family, and so I'm not gonna go into too much praise, you know I love you. So let's go ahead and get right into it, because I think when we talk about defund the police, there's really a lot of confusion about what that actually means, because on the front end, it sounds really revolutionary and it sounds very radical. And I think that it can be revolutionary and radical, but it doesn't necessarily have that type of connotation. So I wanted to open up to the panel kind of that question of what does defund the police mean to you? Lily?
Yes, so for us, we have been doing work around defunding law enforcement for many years now. We see this as a very good strategic tool, right, in which we are able to arrive to our goal. For us, it's very important to clarify that defunding the police or defunding law enforcement is not their end goal, right? That's not where we end. That is just where we start. Because what we want to do is really get rid of this current system that we have, a system that was not designed for people of color, right? A system that was actually, has been inflicting harm in our communities for way too many generations. We want to stop it. We want to kind of pause, reset, and start all over again. And we want to start in a way that it's inclusive, in a way that actually gets us closer to public safety. Public safety is not equal police. Police is not equal public safety, right? We need to start rethinking public safety. Public safety means the public feels safe. And who's the public? All of us. And what does safe mean? That all of us have a chance of thriving, right? So we need to start rethinking public safety, and defunding the police is a very first step to start getting there.
So once I ask the question, I'm not going to continue to kind of like, because again, I want this to be a conversation. And so a conversation with one another, a conversation. So rather than, you know, talking points or particular thing, let the conversation begin.
Okay, I'll jump in. Defunding the police is defunding all law enforcement, all law enforcement bodies. That's the police, that's the sheriff, that's immigration, that's the district attorney, that's the jails, and that's the prisons, and how they all intersect. It's looking at the allocation of billions and trillions of dollars that go into law enforcement federally and statewide and locally, and looking at where the harm is. And instead of a punitive system, looking at a system that looks at where's the harm and let's heal people. It's a restorative and transformative, and it's based on communities knowing what's best for them and reallocating those funds to ensure that we can provide those services. And I have some ideas, but we can talk about those later.
So for me, defunding the police is everything that everyone has already said. And for any journalists or media outlets that may be watching this, we're very clear. We know what defunding means. It's literally defunding the police, taking away money that they get every year and putting it back into community. So there's a saying right now that is happening on Twitter, and it's defund the police, refund the community. Because for years, and I find this to be very interesting, that this has been a puzzle, something that media journalists can't figure out when their job is to research. It's been mind-boggling to me, because for years we have watched the systematic defunding of programs in our community. There's no question about that. But then, you know, these journalists have questions about defunding the police. Do they actually mean that? What does that mean? Yes, we mean it. The same way that y'all have continually pulled money from our communities, or specific to San Diego, how you have pulled money from communities and schools south of the 8 and sent those resources north of the 8. Like, that's what we're talking about. We are talking about refunding that money, running it back to our communities and the people who need it. So to me, that looks like pulling some of that money out of police budgets and putting it into mental health programs, right? Police have no business ever responding to people experiencing mental health crises. They are not equipped. They're dangerous. Why would you send someone with weapons to respond to somebody who is having a mental health crisis? What do you think is going to happen? That situation is going to be escalated, right? Defunding police is taking that money and putting it back into our children's schools. Have you seen the lunches that they're serving kids at San Diego Unified School District? Do you know that some kids have lunch debts? They're refusing children food because they have a debt, but yet our police are fully funded. That looks like pulling money from police and putting it into substance abuse program, because addiction is real and we should treat it as a health issue, a public health issue, which is what it is. Why would we send police to respond to issues like that? That to me is what defunding police means. It is pulling money out of their budget, their oversized budgets, might I add, because they're very large, and putting that money back into our people. When people have homes to go to at night, they are safer. When parents can find adequate childcare that's affordable, that won't put them in debt, them and their children are safer. So when I'm talking about defunding police, I'm talking about pulling that money. We just don't want to pull the money for pulling money. That money needs to go somewhere. It needs to go back into our communities, because all of these things make us safer. These social services make us safer than police responding to these crises that are happening or that people may experience. And we also, if we really want to be holistic about it, we would be talking about, because I know everyone's number one concern is, well, if we defund the police and then eventually abolish them, which that's me. Hello, I'm that person. Hi. We need to abolish police. But they think if we do that, well, then what about killers? What about, these people that go out and harm people? But my question to you would be, shouldn't we find out what leads people to that behavior first and address that? Because it sounds like something's not right. And if we're actually addressing that, then we wouldn't need police to respond to these things, because people wouldn't be out here, participating in these kind of behaviors. So we really need to meet the whole person in our community from top to bottom and address the things that are in deficit because our communities have historically been defunded from.
Well said.
I'm gonna jump in real quick. The way that I find that I understand defund the police is really when I look at it through a divest invest framework, right? When I look at you divest funding from the police and you invest that funding into community infrastructure, right? Community-led infrastructure. So for me, it has been helpful to look at the work that our colleagues at CURB, California's United for a Responsible Budget, I've been working with them for many years now. When I look at the work that Critical Resistance has done around defunding the police, right? When I hear Angela Davis talking about it's not just defunding the police, it's also creating in the community, right? So it's reimagining what our communities can look like when we pull money from policing and into, I think Kim talked about this a little bit, right? Into education, into health, into food security, into job security, right? When we move the resources away from policing and into what our communities need. And even though I believe the hashtag is new, right? Hashtag defund the police. Those of us that have been on the ground working and struggling, that have been organizing on the ground, I think we're the ones that know the defund hashtag the best, right? Because we're out there working for a better community. We're out there working to make sure that our children and our loved ones in our community have more positive experiences in the community. So we have the answers to what defunding means, right? It's the work that we're already doing. It's moving away. I know Pillars does a lot of work around gang documentation, right? It's moving away the resources from gang detectives and reinvesting them somewhere else, right? Somewhere where it can go into youth programs, somewhere where it can go into other different public health services. So I like to use that framework when I talk about defunding, because it's exactly what Lily said. It doesn't start with it doesn't stop with defunding. It starts there.
Well said. Candy, I think that's you.
I mean, I echo and lift up what everyone's saying. Like, and I don't really want to repeat that because I really think to the idea of defunding is also envisioning anew, building anew, because the question calls to mind for me, what does it mean? What are we replacing it with? So we can't talk about just the defunding part because it's just the start. So for me, when I say I dream abolition into fruition, it's going to be beyond just defunding the police and moving towards that. So there's also work in our own communities on what we need to do to build anew, to replace what this system has never been designed for Black, Indigenous, people of color communities. So what that means is really understanding those alternative models and to paint and create it ourselves. This gives us the self-determination that Leila talked about. It gives us the agency and the autonomy and the power, building the power in our community that we have the power to do that. And people in the communities have been doing that long before. Like, we all know that even in our own Asian communities, we cannot count on the police, that we have to count on each other. So there's a couple of understandings in what that looks like. It means that we have to build our relationships. And because in order to build our relationships, I look to models like the Bay Area Transformative Justice Collective that have really created these models of creating pods. Because, and whether you call it a pod or not, we know in our communities who we call on, that it's not gonna be calling the police, we're gonna call the folks that we know who's gonna protect us and show up for us. So with that, it means basically redefining what safety and security means, creating a culture of accountability, and then understanding policing. Like, I look to models of folks like Kat Brooks from Anti-Police Terror Project, who did defund OPD back in 2017. And Kat's work, they set up first responders. First responders are like, how did we think of this work? How do we protect our folks? How do we show up? How do we show up for our people? So we have to think of the ways it's also been naturalized for us to think, because policing is not just this idea that just came out of nowhere. It's an idea that was just created. And so it's become so normalized in how we think. So policing becomes a culture. It becomes a culture of how we police our children, how we police in school systems, how we police our own health, how we police people's bodies. So it becomes this whole culture where we're so used to that I have to decolonize the way I educate my children, how I raise them. So it's so innate within us. It's so naturalized that we don't realize that we weren't always like this before. You know what I mean? Because it's such a system that's been so normalized. So that means we have the power to create anew because we weren't always this way. And it also comes to the idea of not just replacing it, but to come to the understanding on something that Mariam Kaba, who's an abolitionist, who's done powerful work also in like fundraising for folks to pay off their medical debt across this country. They've done it from city to city. This is the way we show up for our communities. So to me, when I think of defunding the police, I'm looking at this larger picture on how we do that. And so if we come to the idea that if one person is caged, then all of us are. So we have to think about that. And it's also mean being committed to the political education that we need in our communities to be able to get to these understandings.
Candy,
go ahead, Kim.
I was gonna say, Candy hit on something important too. Like, we have a real opportunity right now, and I want to thank, because I lean heavily on radical Black feminists. I mentioned earlier, Mariam Kaba is one, all the snaps. Angela Davis, who everyone knows or should know about, has been an abolitionist and doing abolitionist work for quite some time, as well as Ruth Gilmore. So I want to elevate those names. There are plenty others now too, some young, Charlene Carruthers with BYP, like there's so many. But I'm saying that because I am who I am now because of their own practices and politics. And Candy, what she said just reminded me that, you know, we're in a moment now where we should be dreaming. Black women told me and encouraged me to dream and dream big. And I want to relay that to you all, because while we're saying defunding the police and pulling money out of police budgets, we can go further. I mean, why should cops be allowed to have administrative leave where they're still being paid? Why are they still being allowed to access their pensions after they're slaughtering us, right? Like, these are more options and more things to think about when we're talking about defunding. You know, we should be making cops liable for misconduct. Who do you think pays when they beat somebody down or kill someone and then that person sues, which they should, they rightfully should sue? Who pays for that though? Hi. Like, why should we continue funding that? That should be something that comes from the police themselves, like pull it out of their pensions, right? So I wanted to say that, and I thank you, Candy, for what you said, because I don't want folks to just think linearly like, oh, defunding police is only about pulling money out of their budgets, but we need to be hitting all these different things. Pensions, administrative leave, all of these things we should be talking about in the spectrum of discussing defunding the police as well.
Yeah, man. I mean, as some of you all were wondering why I invited these people, man. You know, these are my teachers right here. And so if I wasn't so busy listening, I'd be taking notes, and I can't wait to watch the recording of what's happening. For those of you who are listening, we are also have a list of some of the people that they're referencing. So we're trying to create a list of the names that they mention, and some of the organizations that we'll also post. So I kind of put that on Jean-Louis. So panelists, as you're mentioning those names, you might want to just, when you have 2 seconds, type those over to Jean-Louis, and so we can have that list for everybody who is listening in. Because again, this is meant to be a conversation, but unless we are educating ourselves individually, and unless we're leaning upon the rich kind of history around prison abolition, around defunding law enforcement, and all these other conversations, you know, it's going to be talking points. And in order for a movement to be sustained, in order for a movement to create real systemic change, I think we have to have real critical thinkers who are reading, who are having conversations, who aren't offended by questions, but really willing to dig in to the sorts of questions that we're asking about now and that our panelists are asking as well. So when it comes to critical thinking, you know, I think a lot of us, as the defund the police movement has been popping up, and this, not everybody has to answer this question, but if you feel comfortable, please do. You know, we recently had a city council vote where our city council overwhelmingly voted in support of the mayor's budget, which had an increase to the police budget. And I think that came as a shock to a lot of people who had been, you know, particularly those who had been advocating for defunding the police over the last couple of weeks, and perhaps not as big of a surprise to those of us who have been, you know, fighting to defund the police for, you know, much of our lives. But could you all kind of talk to your response to the city council's vote on, what was it? Was that Monday? To the city council's vote on Monday that had, you know, frankly, a very kind of amazing response and attention by people who normally don't pay any attention to the city council. So if you all could respond to kind of your reflections and your thoughts about that vote, that would be, I think, informative for us.
One of the things that I took away was I am so extremely proud of the young organizers who put that together and the work they put into organizing something historical. I'm honored to know them. I'm honored to have, I got game from them. As far as social media, I was like, how do you guys have 10,000 people on Instagram? What do we have, like 300 colleagues? But we're out here, but still these young people have it. They need to help us. But, and just looking at that, looking at politics themselves, I wasn't astounded. I wasn't surprised or shocked. I was more there for the campaign and the movement and the building. And knowing what they had started, they started it with such force that it can't be stopped. Disappointed, I was disappointed. I was disappointed in myself for having so much, for believing so much that something like that could be done without the background work we know that we have to do. But most importantly, it made me step away from the political kind of view of it and go back to my roots, which is grassroots community development and community building. And I don't know how they're gonna use legislation to make me human. That's gonna come from the streets. That's gonna come from our day-to-day. And starting to really look at, like my Nigerian brothers and sisters, the Igbo, and how they have relieved themselves of the state, because I'm colonized. We are a colonized people. Everybody on this panel, we are in colonialism right now in America, and that's why the police deal with us the way that they do. And how have some of our African and some of our South American brothers and sisters dealt with that colonialization are the lessons, the Zapatista, the Igbo, and they're there, those real life tangible lessons, and how we're gonna then build on that to get us where we wanna be.
Yeah, I mean, that's a powerful, I mean, that's a powerful response, and the importance of us looking at how have the police been defunded, and how have other organizations, how have other movements across the world been able to do that. Did anybody else want to jump in on that question? So, you know, I will say that our councilwoman, Monica Montgomery, somebody who has in the past been a strong advocate to challenge the police, recently came out and posted an explanation for her vote that I think is worth watching and listening to, particularly in understanding, you know, what needs to be done in order to move forward for real, true systemic change. And so I encourage people to look at her recent conversation there with the community and kind of the points that she's bringing up in that. And again, I think we have a right to challenge our politicians. We have a right. Frankly, we have a responsibility to challenge our politicians. And if if we aren't there watching, if we aren't there having our voices heard when they do things that we disagree about, well, you know, I think we've kind of fallen for the okie doke, because we have a politics in the United States where we're told, you know, if you don't vote, you can't complain, which is, first of all, is ridiculous. Whoever came up with that. But I think it's both important to vote, but it's also important to complain, whether you voted or not, to let them know that you're not representing your interests the way that you think they should be. And it's also important to educate ourselves on how these processes work and push forward. And I know I'm not supposed to be talking, but the last thing that I'll say is, you know, we have a lot of elections coming up for council members. And unless we're putting pressure on those people who are running, and unless we get people who are running to get into office that can then push towards a defunding the police campaign, you know, we're going to continually find ourselves in the same position. So, you know, we have a very diverse panel here. And those people who know me know that I am a big fan of unity and solidarity in any type of fight against oppression. Could you all speak a little bit about the importance in having a unified front and having a multicultural, multi-ethnic, everything front in fighting to defund the police?
Call on someone, call it.
Candy.
Oh, man. Well, I mean, I think, and it's such a hashtag phrase, you know, our freedoms are bound together. But to me, it's more than that, because I follow that leadership from Black folks who've said that and who continue saying that, because I believe that to be true. I also want to remove myself, because a lot of folks that I'm seeing, especially in Filipinx communities, tend to lift up like, well, we owe our lives to Black liberation movements. And I think that's important to understand that, yes. Am I freezing? I think I'm freezing.
It's down to deep, so you cut off, Candy, at Black liberation movements.
Yeah, and our work has, our freedoms are tied through the Black liberation movements, indigenous communities. However, I also think that because I believe in humanization, I believe in justice, I believe in the freedom of oppressed peoples, I believe in love, not just any love, revolutionary love. And if I love my folks, and if I love my siblings, it must remove itself from a transactional lens that reinforces individual capitalism idea that we owe and indebted to our lives, to our freedom, because folks of color, Black folks have showed up together. To me, it's about the simple fact that I love our folks, I love our people, and this is about doing this together in solidarity for all of our freedoms. If I believe in collective liberation, that means I believe in solidarity. It means that I believe in our collective power and our collective action to get there. And we cannot have solidarity when we don't do that together. So to me, it goes beyond the idea that we are owing our lives to people. No, it's about justice. It's what's right. It's about humanization. It's about solidarity. It's about the very fact that revolutionary love means I show up for my peoples. And that's where we need to be. And yeah, we can talk about the fact that Asian folks in this country, Filipino folks in this country, where there's 3.5 million Filipinx immigrants living on this land. We have 800,000 more who are undocumented Filipinos in this land. We also have had here locally in San Diego, Dennis Carolino, and then we had Toby Diller, who were killed and shot by the police. All of that needs to be lifted, but we aren't going to get to freedom. We aren't going to be getting to that freedom when we keep on reinforcing models of criminalization. So in order to even understand anti-Asian racism,
it must be the FBI or the CIA, because every time she's about to drop it, it freezes up. Does anybody else want to jump in?
did I just freeze again?
You did freeze up, and I was like, man, I blamed the man, but yeah, you did freeze up. I was going to.
No, where did I freeze at?
Yeah, it was heavy though.
but it's coming to the understanding that in order to talk about anti-Asian racism, the deaths of our own people, is to understand that anti-Asian racism, as said by folks like
you know, hopefully we can get a line item in the budget to make sure that all activists who come with this type of fire that Candy has can get very strong Wi-Fi and technological service, so we can all.
Oh my gosh, they don't want to hear me. Oh my God, F the system. But like, anti-Blackness and anti-Black racism is the fulcrum to white supremacy, and anti-Asian racism is made possible by anti-Blackness. So for our folks, Asian folks, is not going to get free if we don't address anti-Black racism. So it's coming with that understanding, but also revolutionary love.
Powerful, thank you. Flower.
I think Lily was gonna go before me.
Lily.
Go ahead, jump in.
Yes. Yeah, thank you for that. I just want to, you know, add on this conversation from a Chicana perspective, right? That the fight for, you know, for liberation, it's really rooted, or fight for liberation is really rooted in what Leila mentioned earlier, right? We're all colonized people. My people has been fighting colonization for over 500 years, right? And part of that colonization included this sentiment of anti-Blackness, right? We were taught to hate people that look a specific way. And within my community, that hate was so rooted that we started even hating each other. For us, the conversation around anti-Blackness also has to start with recognizing that a lot of us who have roots in countries like Mexico and Central America and parts of South America actually have roots that descend from folks who were brought to this continent as slaves, right? So we do have Afro-Latinos, we have Afro-Mexicans, and we have people who are Black and Chicano, right? And that is within our community. So for me, like, that's where we start, recognizing our own folks who are dealing with both, right? Like, we have a lot of Black immigrants, just to give you an example, right? Who are dealing with having this uncertainty of being an immigrant, of you being an undocumented immigrant in this country and being Black, right? So for us, we start there, but it doesn't end there, right? Because we also have, like Candy mentioned, right? Like, all of us who are not white have benefited from this liberation, or the fight for from Black leaders, right? Because when we are fighting against a system of oppression, we have to understand that it's not just those who are fighting who are going to benefit from it. It's all of us, right? When we are talking about rethinking public safety, right? Like, when we're thinking about defunding the police, when we're saying we're going to put money into our schools, just to give you an example, we're not saying that money is only going to go to Black kids or only going to go to brown kids. We're saying our schools, our whole system is going to benefit, and every single kid that touches that system will benefit. So for us, or for me, like I was saying, I'm coming from a Chicana lens to this, and for me, I have to start with understanding that where that anti-Blackness comes from, and start de-learning it, right? And learning new ways of thinking and seeing the world. It took over 500 years for my community to be where we're at right now. It's gonna take a long time to go back, but it starts right now. It starts today. It starts with my generation, right? And also starts at home. I know I have been having a lot of conversations with my own parents, Mexican immigrants that don't really speak English, who have been taught, like everyone else, that when you see a Black person, that they are the other. I start home, right? Having those conversations with my own family, and confronting the anti-Blackness comments and jokes and all of that, that unfortunately happen everywhere.
Thank you, well said.
I also want to add to the conversation of solidarity. I also come from a school of thought of Chicanos, right? I believe in self-determination. I also believe, meaning that our communities are the ones with the solutions, that we don't need saviors. I've spoken at different panels to different white allies and white friends, and I've told them, right, that we don't need saviors. We don't need folks to come into our communities to save us. We don't need sympathy. We don't even need empathy. What we need is solidarity. So that word solidarity is very key and important, because even though Lily and I are here on this panel as Chicanas, we are in solidarity with the Black Liberation Movement, right? We are in solidarity with folks that are oppressed. We're in solidarity with the Native American movement. That is very important to understand, that we're not going into anybody else's community to save them or to be the saviors. We work within our own communities to make change happen.
Yes, thank you.
I don't want to reiterate what's already been said, because there's been a lot of great things, but I do want to highlight this. One of the reasons I think it's critical that everyone is invested in this, one, because anytime, well, let me say it this way. When Black people get free, everybody else gonna be free. Everyone else's liberation is contingent upon ours. Anytime Black people have gotten even an inch of success, everyone else has benefited from that. But I also want to say it's important that everyone be invested in this, because we need to ensure, that's one of the better ways to ensure that no one is left behind. When we're organizing, we need to be making sure that we're including folks who are at the margins within the margins, right? Like, for example, Black trans people, they're also being killed by police, but we don't hear about it. Media doesn't report on it, or those stories get swept under the rug. And I think it was the National Coalition of, anti-violence programs that reported that transgender people of color, I think, were 6 times more likely than white folks to experience violence by police. That needs to be talked about. We need to be uplifting Black trans folks, but also centering them in these conversations and making sure that they're involved in this work. If we're not all working together, we are going to leave key people out, and it's not right. And it works against everything that we're trying to do now. So that's another reason why it's critical that everyone's invested and engaged in this work and this fight, so that no one gets left behind, especially the folks living at the margins within the margins.
Leila, you look like you had something to say. Am I misreading?
No, I didn't. I was just, as the panelists were speaking, I was reflecting on how in San Diego for 2020, we spent almost $9 million on the gang suppression unit. And historically, what the gang suppression unit has done in our communities, and we're abolitionists, but even trying to meet folks who are just on reform part of the way, we have to have an understanding that all of the things that the reformists are saying we need to do have been done over and over and over. And that includes coffee with the cop, or that community policing. And some of the gang injunctions out of Los Angeles came directly out of those community policing programs, where business owners and homeowners were against the actual community members. And they really wanted to go after the Mexican vendors there, but couldn't generate enough to give them those infractions. So you had the Playboy Crips get the gang injunction in one of the areas that didn't have the highest level of crime. So we're looking at the politicizing of our pain and the criminalization. So this $9 million in San Diego for people that come into our homes, that stop us on the streets with no probable cause, who fill out field information, who take pictures of our kids who are 13, 14, and 15 years old, whose sole job is to come into our community and an oppressive slave patrol manner. And defunding an institution like that brutalizes our community. 1988, Los Angeles, they went into the projects, they arrested 1,500 gang members, and I think only 100 of them where they had a conviction stick. So that means 990 something, my math isn't great tonight, but a whole lot of people were harmed that had no criminality going on, and that's still going on in our community. So why can't we take $1.2 million out of that $9 million and hire people from our community that go in and talk to young people? Because it's not about gangs. It's about getting our young people out of the cycles of poverty and trauma and substance abuse and have them work daily with our kids. That's only $1.2 million. Why don't we take another $1 million and invest in what Kim was talking about on us all being community responders and having an infrastructure when there's mental health issues, we can come out there. Kim has been on the ground building this for over a year. So coming together, making sure our community gets the training. Why don't we look at using those evidence-based models that work for us, from the credible messenger and Flor and Lily, there's a Spanish word, but it's for health workers. These are evidence-based methods of people that live in the community that can knock on doors and help people. The gang suppression unit itself is a colonized first plan of attack against Black and brown people to put us into prisons. And every gang law is racist. So why don't we start there?
The word is promotoras, and other communities also use líderes comunitarios, which translates to community leaders, right? Training and empowering our communities to do the work that social services does, that researchers do, and that police do.
And that's critical, because just consider in San Diego alone, how many folks, I'm about to name some folks, I hope they don't get upset with me, but how many of our own people have intervened and saved people's lives? Tasha Williams is a great example of this. Tasha has gotten so many calls when people are in the middle of a mental health crisis or a DV, incident of domestic violence, and she shows up on the scene and de-escalates, and she keeps those people safe. No police involvement. How many folks from Pillars, OGs, have intervened when young folks from different sets are beefing, and they've intervened to make sure that there hasn't been an all-out war or shootout? Like one of the phrases that we've been using is "we keep us safe," and it's true, because we have all the tools that we need to keep our people safe, but we're underfunded. We've been defunded, right? No one's giving our folks the money to do that. I tell Leila all the time, Tasha needs to be paid for this. Tasha needs to be paid. Leila and I have many conversations about that. But we need funding in order to pay her to be responding to these incidences and crises that are happening. And we don't have that money, and police have it and are hoarding it, and we're not actively fighting to pull that money and put it into these programs or people who are going to be first responders on the ground, then we're screwed. We're absolutely screwed. So we need to put that money where it belongs. We need to be investing in our folks who are actually doing the work to keep us safe. And it's not a new concept. Communities all over the world have been doing this for years. For years they've been doing this. So it's not like we're trying to do anything new. It's just a national call now. It's just the call has never been this great, which is why it's incumbent upon us to use this moment and to not waste it.
Yeah, well, I mean, shoot, thank you for those kind of enlightening responses. Shout out to my brother and comrade and teacher out there, Michael Odom. So I haven't been able to follow the chats too much, but he's been lecturing and teaching and addressing these issues and addressing the importance of looking at this as really revolution versus reformation. At addressing kind of the roots of capitalism and Eurocentric thinking and the way that we approach all of these. And I think that that's reflected in what everybody's saying and the importance of us really beginning to think on our own. We've been trained to think the way we think. And so it takes time to decolonize our minds. It takes time to be able to look at other things. And that requires reading. That requires a lot of other kind of modes of thought and conversation and frankly dealing with one another. One of the other questions that I was able to kind of bring out that kind of follows in line with the points that Dr. Odom kind of brought up in the chat is I think there's a lot of people out there who don't necessarily understand the difference between reform and revolution, or reform versus abolition. Could somebody kind of address that conversation, right? Because, I think we've been taught that, ironically, that abolition is somehow some kind of scary thing when, when we just talking about freedom, right? But if somebody can talk about the difference between abolition and reform, or revolution and reform, I think that could be useful for a lot of the people who are chiming into this conversation. Kim?
I feel like I've taken up a lot of space, Khalid. So while I would respond, and I will, I just want to step back in this moment and let somebody who hasn't spoken as much speak, and then I'll come in.
Lily?
So how about I give you an example of how we see that in practice, and maybe others can like point out the difference. So for us, for my work, I know that, you know, I mentioned most of my time I spend really on this kind of advocacy around immigrant rights. And a few years ago, right, during the Obama administration, there was this like idea that was sell to us that there's such a thing as bad immigrants, right? Like there were the good immigrants and the bad immigrants. And the Obama administration, as a friendly administration to immigrants, told us that, you know, they were going to stop the deportations as family separations, and they were just going to deport those who were in county jails and prisons, state and federal prisons, right? So they say, we're going to keep the good immigrants, we're going to like deport the bad immigrants. That is a reform, right? When you say, oh, this system is not working, let me just make a couple of tweaks here and there, and now we're gonna like roll it out. And what ended up happening was that actually the Obama administration became the president that deported more people in the history of the United States before him. Right now we're in a different era. And who was he deporting? He was deporting a large number of Black immigrants. Why? Because these Black immigrants were being over-policed, and they were being criminalized in the communities, and they were being put in these prisons, and now they were just the perfect target for deportation. So that's what reform looks like. Now, when we say we are gonna abolish ICE, right? We wanna end deportations. We're meaning everyone. Everyone gets a chance of, for us and in deportations, everyone gets a chance to stay in with their families. We're not making a distinction between, you know, a Black immigrant versus an immigrant from an European country, right? We're saying that everyone gets to stay. And we're saying this system, it just doesn't work, right? Like this system, it just has this problem. So let's end it and then start all over again.
Thank you. That's well said. You know, another book name that I'll throw out there, Race and Nation. I can't remember the author, but it talks about how the concept of race and the concept of nations actually came about kind of in the same way for the same purposes, and that both of them are kind of created constructs in order to control, in order to oppress, in order to hold down, and in order to benefit a very few elite. So, you know, borders aren't natural. Borders are bullshit. We got a shirt, one of my favorite shirts, that borders are bullshit. And it's because they were created. And those of us who buy into borders, but decry racism, really need to ask ourselves, well, who are the people who created these borders in the first place? And what are their connections? And who are the people who continue to support the militarization of the border? And I think that what we'll quickly find is it's the same people who lynched our great grandmothers and grandfathers and want to incarcerate gang members and Black and brown people are the same ones who are the first to decry, you know what, go home to where you came from. So those are all, you know, very important points. Thank you. Another question, did anybody want to answer that before I kind of come to the next question? Candy?
Yeah, and I thank you for laying that out explicitly. I also, again, going back to the idea of what we're replacing this with, because I think it's really, really important in that, like, if you look at the ways people understand abolition and it to be eliminating surveillance, eliminating mass incarceration, prison system, right? But it's also like coming to the understanding. And I think if you read the book, another one, Locking Up Our Own, James Forman, who wrote that book, is talking about abolition is not just the absence of prisons, but the presence of the systems that are in place to support people so that they never turn to crime or violence in the first place. So it's really about creating this world that we want. So when I talk about pods, because Transformative Bay Area Justice Collective really explains this so beautifully, Mia Mingus, who does work around transformative justice, it's really to rebuild this world of understanding how do we get to these harm and violence. And Mariam Kaba also always talks about like this idea of understanding how do we get from the small place that we can't always always come from this model that we can't just address these violence and vulnerabilities with criminalization. So how do we create that world? Is creating that system. So to me, abolition is, again, that culture of abolition, not just what the system already is, but how do we create that culture? And it really goes back to our little pods in our communities, how we address harm in our communities, from the very little thing, even the toxic things that people say, which is rooted in heteropatriarchal systems. So I'm really glad, Kim, that you lifted up Black trans women and queer folks in our communities, because we have to understand that the system itself is not a feminist system. So I look to the work of the Santa Cruz women who wrote a letter to the anti-rape movement, and how they went about and addressed, how do we move away from this accountability of the state, but towards the accountability amongst our people. So transformative justice work is really key in instilling that. So abolition to me is about creating this world that we really need to replace it with.
Khalid, can I jump in real quick?
Please.
The tech sent me one of the questions to answer. So this question that I'm going to be answering was in regards to my comment around solidarity. It comes from Emily. Emily says, would you say more about how to be in solidarity with Black community as opposed to just empathy or savior leadership, right? And I believe the change is going to happen incrementally. And Lily says it best. She says, with the decrease in budget instead of the increase, right? We can start there. It's also going to take a bottom-up approach and a strength-based approach in our communities to start creating and reimagining. We're going against a system that maintains the status quo and protects power, right? That's what we're up against. So when I talk about solidarity, white folk, y'all have been defunding the police, right? And I think AOC says it best, right? She talks about how white communities have been defunding the police, right? They divest from policing and into making sure that they have the top schools. They make sure that they have the top sports programs. They make sure that they have the top health services. So when we talk about defunding the police, AOC did recommend looking at models that come from white communities, right? Because it's already happening. So when I talk about solidarity works, it means that white folk need to start in their own community as well, right? Y'all start at home, like Lily said she did. She starts talking to family and friends about what it means to be in solidarity with Black folk and brown folk, and what it means to be in solidarity with Native Americans. So the change starts at home. Even though it is structural, right? We can take a step and start at home. And I want to emphasize the part about the savior, right? There's a lot you can do in your own community.
Yeah, I mean, when that's a good point. I wonder what kind of conversation we would have if we began to demand that we take money away from private schools and schools that get lots of money from taxes and give that to the police in those neighborhoods. So just to clarify Flower's point, I think that she was saying when white people are defunding the police, they're defunding the police in their own community, but have no problems with funding the police and kind of the militarization of Black and brown communities and the border community.
Khalid,
yeah.
I wanted to speak really quickly to the reform conversation that's happening, because as you know, as many of you may have seen or known, a platform called 8 Can't Wait was released, which is filled with 8 reforms that are horrible because the majority of police departments already implemented them and they're still killing us, right? So to put things into perspective, the history of policing is critical when we're talking about abolition, right? And we need to understand how things started and why they were formed. And so policing in the North was about protecting goods and materials and shipments of things, right, and property. And in the South, it was about maintaining control over enslaved Black people, and they were known as slave patrols. Well, they went from slave patrols to police. That is the reform. Police have been reformed. We're experiencing the reform now. So I'm saying that to say that this is a prime example of why reforms are terrible, are not good, and they just don't work. And we should all be moving towards an abolitionist framework. Think about back before there were body cameras, or when there were body cameras, or some body cameras, and people were saying things like, oh, you know, we should require that all police have body cameras. Well, Stephon Clark, they turned their body camera off and killed him. Like, come on now, the body cameras are here, but they're not using them. So that's a reform, and we see it's not working. And even then, we have body cameras and they're leaving them on and brutalizing people and killing them. That is not okay. So we are already in a reform. The police and prisons, like that, slavery was no longer socially acceptable. So it transformed into something just a little more beautiful that people could manage, and that's prisons. Same with police. Like, we're experiencing the reform now, and that's why we have to abolish these things. And I know that 8 Can't Wait has been lifted up a lot, and so I want you all to know that there is another platform developed by radical Black feminists and other Black folks who are deep into abolition, and it's 8toabolition.com. Everybody should be on that site, plugging into that platform, and that's the platform we should all be adopting and carrying and uplifting. And it's okay if you don't know, you know, or understand abolition. We're all learning. I have never arrived. I'm still, even though I've been talking about it since 2013, I'm still very new, but that's what this is for. And that's what our community is for, so that we can continue to have conversations about that and talk about ways that we our own selves can become abolitionists, and how we can encourage our community and bring our community to that place as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the issues with reform, and Flower has spoken to this before, is that it still, you have the same root, you're just changing the shape of the house. And so if the root is still white supremacy, if the root is still that Black and brown people are somehow less than human or feel pain less than white people, then it doesn't matter how much you reform it, it's not going to change. And so having real revolutionary practices in order to kind of to pull out racism and white supremacy by the roots and start over again, I think is an extremely important practice for all of us to be leading on. There's a couple of questions. I mean, the problem is you all say such amazing things that I lose questions and start thinking in other directions. Can we talk a little bit about the role of police unions? This was a question that popped up in the chat a while, and how police unions and lobbyists, what role they play in this conversation around defunding the police.
If I remember correctly, I don't think that police unions existed until 1968, and that's when the first unions were created. The police historically, besides slave patrols, worked to suppress and oppress workers and to stifle any union building. They murdered hundreds of thousands of people who were just trying to get a livable wage, a basic work day. That was their job. And then they became a union because they saw the benefits of being a union. And I think it's criminal that the police department can call themselves a union, period. An association of criminals, I'm okay with. But they did that in order to utilize the basic worker structures of a union to increase budgets, and then have membership where they can then pay politicians to do their bidding and to create laws that oppress us as people. And we have politicians of color who accept this money, and then they make sure that they never go past this very weak attempted reform. So we never have true change. And I think that's an issue. And the police officers, people who are here to create force and are the state's basic dogs for Black and brown and poor and non-white immigrants, they should not be able to even lobby. I think that's criminal within itself. I believe that the structures of their contracts are within themselves hurtful and harmful to people. And the fact that as an officer, I can do a crime and then I can sit and watch the crime on the body camera or whatever before I even talk to an attorney. And then I can talk to my associates, my partners, the other officers, and make sure all of our story is straight and we get it together. Wow. And we expect something critical. We expect fairness to come out of these things. And basically, there's no reason for the police except for to oppress people who are not rich. And that's why we have a person who told us abolishing the police was ridiculous, and then she went to a BLM march today, and that would be Barbara Bree. That's the kind of tone deafness that we have to deal with. And I'm with you, Khaled. How do you reform? I don't want to reform slavery anymore. I'm done with it. Can we please let it go?
Yeah, and you know, I think it's an important point to make that while we were disappointed in every vote on the city council, with the exception of Chris Ward, I think there was also only one council member who actually called for increasing the police budget even more than they were already. And so hopefully people can do their research and see who that person was as well, and hold them accountable also in the voting booth. Did anybody else want to answer that question about police unions and their involvement in what we see happening?
As somebody who actually gets paid to work in labor, I would be remiss if I didn't say anything. So for those who don't know, I'm employed by UDW, which is a statewide union. Our headquarters is here in San Diego. We represent home care workers. And I have been work in the labor movement now for 6 years. And Leila hit on everything. Police unions are anti-worker. Okay, we should only stick to calling them associations. They should not be called unions. They're anti-worker for the reasons that Leila already laid out for us. But what I would encourage folks to do, because there's no need for me to go on, Leila did an excellent job covering that, is AFL-CIO is the House of Labor. And if there's labor folks on here, they're probably gonna get upset with me, but I don't care. AFL-CIO is our House of Labor. That's where basically almost all unions are housed under the AFL-CIO. And they have the power to determine whether or not they're gonna disassociate or continue to associate with police unions. So as a call to action to you all, I would say if you are a member of a union, make the demand of your union. I know I have talked to my boss about it. Our parent union has asked me, so as UDW, we can't do anything, but our parent union, that would be their place to do something. I've made my demands clear. I want us to disassociate. I do not want police unions to be a part of labor. They have no place there. And if you're a part of a union, you should be pressing your union to make that demand. Several unions across the US have written letters to the AFL demanding that they disassociate from police unions, but we need more, because the president of the AFL said that he will not, and that we need police unions, and that's not true. So I would encourage you, if you are part of a union, to get with your folks and make that demand of the AFL. Well, first make it of your own union, and then take that demand to the AFL, tweet them, call them, email them, anything that you can do to make sure that they know that we're fed up and police unions are anti-worker. There is nothing constructive. They literally work against working people, and they kill us. They kill union members. Like, hello, Michael Brown's mother was a union member, UFCW, like the connections are there. So I would encourage you all to make that demand. I have done my part. I'll continue to do my part to elevate my voice. I don't care who is annoyed by it, but that is our responsibility as union members. We need to make that demand, and we need to make it clear and heard.
And maybe, Jean-Louis, we can put the contact information for sending emails or letters to the AFL-CIO in order to make that demand. And again, as Kim was saying, you know, as a proud card-carrying union member myself, I think it's important for me to, and all of us, to encourage our unions and put pressures on our unions to distance themselves from a racist, oppressive, anti-worker association that has passed itself off as union for too long. One of the questions I think that's out there in a lot of people's mind is, okay, if we get rid of the police, how are we gonna protect ourselves? If we abolish these systems, how are we gonna, like, a lot of people who's this idea that, oh, well, that's ridiculous. Can you all, or can, you know, one of you or two of you address that kind of valid question, I think, that a lot of people have when it comes to abolishing the police and defunding the police?
Policing is modern, it's new. So we have to look before policing, what did we do? And look at all of the other, and within Jim Crow and Black codes and after slavery, Black people did not call the police on each other. We dealt with these in our communal relationships. We dealt with these on having structure within our community. In Nigeria, they call it age grade, where the elders meant something, and people were held responsible from community pressure. and people were actually part of the community. So we didn't tell people that you're not part of the community and make them leave and not give them any assets within the community. Everyone had worth and purpose. And I think that's where the leaving policing comes, with ensuring that everyone in the village is a part of the village. Policing, the conception of policing was the English going and wiping out the Irish. That's how we got our first real kind of police officers. And then later with slave patrols, they really took off in America. So if we look at policing, that's the last thing we need to be doing, because that demonstrates that there is an issue with what's going on in our society if we need police in order to keep the government's interest at hand. And it also demonstrates that we are still under tyranny. We are in a fascist kind of world. Some of our politicians seem like sociopaths, and we talk about the criminal mind, but people are rewarded in America for having a sociopathic way of living, and they end up being the leaders. So in order to do that, we kind of have to pull away from some of those things, because I think America's going to hell in a handbasket. But, and really look at, as people, where do we see our lives, and stop with the good cop, bad cop. But there's great cops and a few bad apples. The system of policing is racist. That's what we need to deal with, the systemic issue of policing and colonialization in America, and why we have the highest rate of putting people in cages like animals.
Well said. Anybody else want to jump in there, or can I kind of go towards our wrapping up? So if all of you can take a time, and one of the things about our political education classes that we try to emphasize is always ending on time. But if we end up going over a little bit, that's all right. But if you can all speak a little bit to how does kind of defunding the police overlap with the work that you or your organization is currently involved in, but also talking about how people can get involved in that process. I think there's already a few people have kind of thrown out ways that you can get involved, but if you can also talk into how people right now can become more involved in the efforts to efforts to defund the police, but two, to create systems in place for, as that process is happening, that we all are also thinking about and creating alternative systems of government or governance of our own people. Candy.
Here we know you can call me. I think it's really important for us, like at Asian Solidarity Collective, our work is working within our communities, right? Working about how do we address anti-Blackness, how do we do decolonization work in our communities to get to the idea and understanding of what does it mean to not rely on the systems that are already in place, this capitalist system. So that's one portion of it. The other part is when we get to this place of these concrete understandings and foundational understandings, is to then do the work in showing up, but more than just that, like how we do it in our everyday lives. Like when we're trying to get to our own freedom, we got to be really intentional of how that impacts other communities. And I'm not going to do it at the expense of Black folks. I'm not going to do that in the expense of other brown folks. I'm not going to do that at the expense of any other oppressed lives. So for example, like even when the anti-Asian racism was at its climb and started continuing to escalate, like people are calling, Summer Stevens, who then puts out a report, hate crime hotline. And I was like, no, we're not doing that. Our organization was like, we ain't doing that. So we put out a statement encouraging people to look at AFCON, which is Asian Pacific Policies reporting hotline, and not going towards a reporting site by Summer Stevens, who's super problematic, the DA, in always targeting Black and brown folks in San Diego. So this is the work that we have to do. And even when we thought about with this larger San Diego API coalition that has recently formed due to these anti-Asian racism, when we're trying to work towards our own resolution to address COVID-related anti-Asian racism, we were really intentional to make sure that we don't put law enforcement in that piece, because we think about those things. This is how we show up, even as we try to attain our own challenges and addressing our own things in our communities, and these maybe more within these systems and these structures that exist. But it's also about all of these items that we're working within these functionings, as well as how we work within our homes. So Asian Solidarity Collective is really rooted in that. And then we're unpacking some difficult conversations, how we're complicit, how we don't show up, and then having to show up with other folks in our communities, and how do we do the work of solidarity building across. So this is the work that we do at Asian Solidarity Collective. And I was hearing you, Khalid, like, you know, I like, we have a long way to go. We have a long, long way to go, but we're here and we're learning. We're here to learn every day. So that's what I believe in our work in our own communities for Asian Solidarity Collective, and beyond that, throughout our Asian American communities.
Right on. Flor?
For the reform folks, right? Reform doesn't dismantle institutionalized or systematic racism, it evolves it, right? So with that being said, I believe the divestment should happen. One, in schools, the school to prison pipeline, we should not have resource officers in schools. We know that policing is the way that folks are funneled into jails, detention, and into state prisons. We should not be putting our resources in policing when we could be putting our resources into education, healthcare, the same thing I started with, right? We need to be addressing food deserts. We need to be addressing food insecurity. We need to be addressing job insecurity. So for me, I really want to thank everybody else that's been on the panel and with us here today. I believe we can do defund the police, exactly what the hashtag says. It is our starting point, not our ending point. And I believe that solutions for reimagining and creating community infrastructure really comes for those of us on the ground and in the community.
Thank you. Kim?
Okay, forgive me. What was the question?
So it was basically just kind of tying this into the work that is already happening in the community and the work that you've been involved in, and also throwing out ways that people can also become involved in the Defunding the Police movement.
Okay, so several things. All of the things that we've raised here tie in together, and I hope that folks see and understand that. And if you don't, I urge you to read books about the history of the US, about systemic racism and things like that. Because like something that blows my mind, I think about it often, is like, why do police have these big old budgets here in San Diego when Barrio Logan has some of the worst cases and rates of asthma and people presenting at emergency rooms with asthma flare-ups? Like, that's an issue of environmental justice. But we are not actively addressing it because we don't have the money. Like, there's no money going to organizations who are doing that work, right? Like, all of this stuff, all the things we've talked about, we need to make the connections of how they're all intertwined. And honestly, y'all, all of this comes back to capital. Capitalism is at the root of all this. Racial capitalism, like, we need to be talking about that and how capitalism has sustained these institutions as well. And quickly, I saw somebody put a comment. I couldn't read all the questions, I'm sorry, but I did see one that talks about the good cop versus bad cop, or there are a few bad apples. I love talking about that because it gets on my nerves. I am of the opinion, ACAB, I fucks with y'all. All cops are bad. There's no such thing as a good cop. FTP, I'm with all of that. And it took me a while to get there, but I had to understand for myself that, one, the idiom is, we need to say it in whole. A few bad apples spoils the bunch. That means all of them, the lot, the whole of them, right? Not just a couple, but all of them get spoiled. And how can you be good, for anyone who still believes there are good cops, how can you be good when you volunteer to take a job that upholds unjust laws? How can you be good and work in a system that is inherently corrupt and violent and that fosters violence and corruption? You cannot. Here's a living example of why there's no such thing as good cops. Many of you by now have seen the disgusting video of that elderly man. I think they said he's 75 years old, white peace activist, that was walking with the helmet towards the police. And there's a crap ton of police walking towards him. Two officers, I believe, shove him on the ground. You can see, trigger warning, there was blood coming out of his head. You can see it. All of the cops standing around did nothing. They said nothing, but these are the cops that you are supposed to believe are good because they're not the ones who actually shoved the officer to the ground. They're not the ones who actually inflicted the violence, but they saw it and they did nothing. In fact, the majority of the officers in that unit quit, not because officers brutalized that poor 75-year-old. They quit because they were mad that the officers were held accountable for their action. You cannot be good working in a corrupt institution like policing. It is impossible. There is no such thing. This is my own opinion. There is no such thing as a good cop. They do not exist. And I stand on that wholeheartedly. For folks who want to get involved in the work that we're doing, if you are interested in creating alternatives to policing in San Diego, I would ask that you reach out to me. I know there's probably some folks on here who were a part of our initial meetings and conversations. We will be getting back together virtually to meet and build more. There are bills, there are actually good bills. Now, we can't legislate our way out of white supremacy. We can't, that's just facts. But there are good bills that could support the defunding of the police. One of those is the Crisis Act, AB 2054. That bill is a pilot grant to fund communities who are developing models and alternatives to police, excuse me. So we being UDW, we're sponsors of that bill. Several other of our comrades across the state are sponsors of the bill, and I'm sharing it because if you're an organization, you need to sign on to that letter. If you believe in Black liberation, if you believe in a world without police, sign on to that letter. Get plugged in also. For white folks who might be on this call wondering, you know, I've heard I need to do anti-racist work, I don't know where to go. SURJ is your home. That is your political home, okay? SURJ stands for Standing Up for Racial Justice. They are a group of white accomplices and co-conspirators, okay? Notice that I did not say allies because we really need to move folks out of being allies and into co-conspirators and accomplices. You need to get plugged in. Our girl Blair runs SURJ. That is your place to do the work that you need to do so that you can start showing up in a real way for not only Black folks, but other people of color in San Diego. So white folks, look up SURJ, S-U-R-J, San Diego on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, reach out to them, get plugged in. Candy is sharing her information about her organization, so I will not talk about that, but there are definitely ways to get plugged into the work. If you know me, if you don't know me, find me on one of these social medias, not on Facebook. Reach out to me. I will point you in the direction that you need to go. And I'm sure other folks on here can share how to get plugged in as well.
And apparently SURJ has a like a member orientation that's happening this weekend. If you just look for SURJ on Facebook, that's S-U-R-G, you should be able to find that and get involved. Candy?
Okay, now I'm like, what's the question?
So the question is just tying it into your work. And again, some people have touched on some of the things, tying it into work. How can people who want to be involved in the defund movement, how does that tie into the work that you're already doing? And what are some of the resources or, ideas that you have for them to get involved?
Okay. I've mentioned the Asian Solidarity Collective. The work that we're doing now and moving forward is just showing up when you do mad coalition building. You know, we need more folks to join Asian Solidarity Collective. The few that I never believe that there aren't organizers. I believe that everyone has an organizer in them. And my job as an organizer is to organize people in. You ain't an organizer if you ain't organizing more people in. That's my job, to get more folks in the movement, because we also know that burnout in our work is real, you know, and I know this firsthand as someone who has gone through heart surgeries, you know what I mean? So I think like that's the work. Join our organizations, join all the organizations, and then do that cross-racial solidarity work. There's mad folks doing a lot of work around addressing anti-Blackness within our Asian communities, and that's good. I think it's important to have these conversations, but I also believe in working with the grassroots organizations that we already know that exist, that are out here, who've been doing the work. Join those organizations. And if it's not for you, then create your own organization. But I think we need to be really grounded in our politicization. We need to strengthen and sharpen our analysis. We need to work at doing that. And that means not just our individual learnings, but I learned my organizing work by building with others. And that means strengthening and building our relationships. This goes towards abolitionist work to me. This means we build our relationships. We create our pods by building relationships. It means building trust. Cross-racial solidarity is coalition building. And I know it's tough. All of us don't always get along. But if folks, like when we started We All We Got mutual aid, is because we all we got. Mutual aid is abolitionist work because it's about justice, not charity. It's about solidarity, not charity. Mutual aid is ways that folks learning from Black Panther parties that showed up for each other. People in Puerto Rico that showed up for each other when the hurricane happened. People been doing this. This is coming from indigenous roots in our communities who showed up for each other. So mutual aid is nothing new either. You know what I mean? So I think we need to really create that culture. And so whatever means and ways that you find to do this work of how do we create the culture we want to address harm and violence, doing transformative justice is real work. And it's work that needs to be here in San Diego. There are folks that do it in multiple ways. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to create an agenda, but there's really prominent work by, I kind of dropped it here, but someone by Leila Lakshmi, a very good friend of mine who's a disability justice organizer, but also wrote a book called Beyond Survival. That's a really key book. At Mutual Aid, at our We All We Got, we study that week to week, every week, reading chapter by chapter on how we can do transformative justice within ourselves and in our communities. To me, that's abolitionist work. Because if we don't trust anybody, if we don't trust this police, we show up for ourselves and we create that safety. And that book is so good because it has tangible steps and ways that we can address harm in our communities. So those are some things that I think are good guidance in how we can move forward in creating this culture of accountability amongst our own communities.
Thank you. I haven't been keeping great track, but I think the two people we have left is Leila Aziz and Lily.
I'm gonna do 30 seconds, let Lily take us home. Mutual aid, Candy, Christina, those who began that abolitionist work, we need to make sure that doesn't go away. Also, I hear my dog barking. The bail fund, you're going to see us do abolitionist work. We were well funded in our community, invested in defunding jails and prisons and abolishing police. We're going to show you what that means to us as we bail people out and we hold our community members, including ourselves, accountable through support, through healing, through conflict resolution. You'll see some of that coming out as we then eliminate cash bail, hopefully in November. And Lily says, take it to the end.
Thank you. I just very quickly, I want to address a question that was sent to me around how do you address anti-Blackness in a non-Black family, because I share how I did that in my family. It kind of goes back to what everyone in this call has been saying. We need to know our history. You need to educate yourself. You need to learn history. All of these systems, you know, they were not created yesterday. They were not created a year ago. They were created hundreds and hundreds of years ago, and they were created with a specific purpose. And that purpose is to keep our communities, Black and brown communities, down, to oppress us, to kill us, to use us to build their empires. And as long as those systems have been around, and I just kind of learn the history and share with folks around you. If you're just keeping all this knowledge, that's not going to do any good. So share with everyone that will listen, everyone that will give you 2 minutes of their day, right? And that's what our people has been doing, right? And I speak for my own organization, but I know I speak for long history of human rights and civil rights leaders that as long as the systems of oppression have been around, our people has been resistant. Our people did not take slavery and they just like say, okay, hands up, take me, right? Our people did not see the white invader that came into our land and stole our land and just say, here, I'm leaving. Our people has been resistant. Our people has been educating. We have been educating each other and ourselves. Revolution has been brewing for generations. And every so many years, we have this window where we all can just go and take it to their front lands, take it to their courtrooms, take it to whatever they're at and demand freedom. We are in this window right now. You can plug into organizations that have been doing defund work for many years. We can educate you, we can bring it to them, but we're now in this historical moment. And the question is, what are we doing about it? Right? What are we all doing about it? And I hope that every single one of us in this call, I hope that your answer is I'm taking it all the way to the top and I'm dismantling this oppressive system. So I just want to end it there.
Yeah, but thank you, everybody, all of the panelists. You know, one of the most difficult things about doing something like this is we have so many amazing people in the community, so many amazing organizations that are in the community that we aren't able to bring everybody on. You know, shout out to People Over Profit, who have also been doing a lot of work with this. Nadia Contreras, who's been, you know, on the front lines of this work. And anytime we put a call out, they show up. She shows up in solidarity and has really been pushing. So there's so many people, so many organizations that we weren't able to have on this particular panel. Again, this is the first in a series of political education panels. All of them are going to be around kind of the subject of, as Kim so eloquently said, fuck the police. For those of us who are, those of you who are saved, darn the police. So I hope that you can all jump in and follow along next Friday. Again, get involved. A lot of you out there are already involved. Keep doing what you're doing. Stand in solidarity with one another. I have nothing but, you know, pride in being from San Diego and being from such an amazing community that's really pushing for real, sustainable, meaningful change. Pay attention to the link or the Google Doc or whatever that Jean-Louis has been furiously working over for resources. Reach out to organizations like Homie Up, National Latino Research Center, Pillars of the Community, Asian Solidarity Convective. Jean-Louis runs like 20 amazing organizations. One of them is like something about we. It involves we. I know it has the plural in there.
We the people.
We the people, baby. Get involved in We the People. A little bit self-centered to name an organization after yourself, but you know what? Nobody's. Hey, who am I to blame? I appreciate everybody for tuning in. Please continue to tune in. Please continue to be involved in your communities. Get to know your neighbors. Know one another. You know, we're never going to be able to not call the police if we don't know our neighbor's name. We're never going to be able to not call the police if we don't have communities that can stand up and stick up for one another. And as Dr. Odom continuously points out, is, you know, part of the capitalist system has been the destruction of community in favor of profit, the destruction of community in favor of capital, and we're the ones who lose out. And so doing whatever we can. So, you know, they're saying, do whatever you can, even if all you do is shout. I mean, do whatever you can if all you do is say hello to your neighbor. If all you do is bring them some cookies or do, you know, whatever it is that you do, we have to have those relationships with one another, because if we don't have those relationships with one another, we're going to continue to be dependent on a racist, militarized system that was not created to help and protect us. It was created to keep people in line and keep people in check, and to protect the elite and those people who continue to benefit from our labor, benefit from our pain, and benefit from our toils. So everybody, thank you everybody so much for being involved. Amazing panel. Jean-Louis, you the real VIP out there, man. We wouldn't have been able to do it without you.
Yeah,
and again, please look on Pillar's webpage, pay attention to the political education classes that will be coming in the future, and look up all of the people who are on this panel. We got a lot of work to do, y'all. Kim?
Call it really quick. I know folks were asking on Instagram if this was going to be recorded. Yes, it is recorded. Please see Jean-Louis to find out where you can go for the playback. And then also, if you're watching this and you're privileged, then you can show up in more than one way. You can open that wallet. Okay, the best way to support some of these orgs is to give directly, direct giving. Give your money to Pillars. Give your money to Asian Solidarity Collective. Give your money to Universidad Popular. Did I say it right? Right? Reach out to these orgs. Open that purse up if you were privileged in that way, because you can show up in more than one way for our community. So we're going to be tapping everybody. But yes, this is going to be recorded. Look to Jean-Louis for that. And I think somebody else asked if they can take snippets of this and put it on social media. I give my permission for that, but other panelists would have to give their permission for that.
Jean-Louis, did you want to talk briefly to what the follow-up is, how people can access the recording and all of that? And
so After the event is over, the recording will be downloaded, and I'm gonna hand it over to Pillars, and you guys should be able to upload this on your Facebook page as well as your website, and people should access it there. And then also I posted on the chat the link to the Google Doc. It had a lot of information, resources, the name of the org, the action calls, including like, you know, who the folks, which org do you follow and get up-to-date action, because y'all, this battle is not going to be over today nor tomorrow. So follow us, because we're going to keep you guys doing the work.
Wonderful, thank you. And so the last thing that I'll say is, you know, we always start off our political education classes by saying, you know, shit is complex. Ironically, this first series doesn't seem very complex, y'all. Like, we need to defund the police ASAP. We need to reinvest in community and move forward. So as we move forward, hopefully we'll get back into the complex shit. But for now, it's pretty simple. It's black and white. It's right and wrong. We got to do what's necessary. Peace. Jean-Louis, peace.
Bye, everyone.
Are we done?
Bye. Great, thank you all.
Hey, you all are amazing. Thank you so much. I don't think it could have gone any better than what did happen. It's an amazing beginning conversation. I'm eternally grateful to all of you that were on this panel, and Jean-Louis for making it possible.
Yes, thank you, Jean-Louis.
Yes.
Apparently I'm getting texts that people can still hear us, so I'm glad I didn't start talking trash about anybody else that's out there. Everybody who's watching,
Like for free.
John-Louis, please turn it off.
End it.
Love you, anybody who's
I
listening
think
into this.
Leila has to take us off, right? Or Jean-Louis?
Leila logged
I
off.
do. I end everybody. So bye.
Love y'all. Bye.
So.